Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel General Hospital today. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. In the intricate web of secrets, betrayals, and revelations that define the world of Port Charles, a seismic shift was about to rock the foundation of General Hospital. For weeks, the whispers had grown louder, the suspicions had deepened, and the tension had reached a boiling point. Dante Falconeri, the steadfast detective with a heart torn between duty and loyalty, had been chasing shadows, piecing together fragments of a puzzle that refused to come into focus. His pursuit of the truth had led him down a treacherous path, one that now pointed directly to a man he had once trusted implicitly, Michael Corinthos. The evidence was undeniable, and the weight of it threatened to shatter everything Dante thought he knew. The saga began months earlier when Drew Kane, a man whose life had been marked by sacrifice and resilience, was gunned down in a brutal act that sent shockwaves through the community. The attack was sudden, vicious, and cloaked in mystery. Drew, a figure who had navigated the dangerous waters of Port Charles with a quiet strength, was left fighting for his life, his fate uncertain as the town grappled with the question of who could have committed such a heinous act. The police department, led by Dante, launched an exhaustive investigation, but the clues were scarce, and the trail seemed to grow colder with each passing day. Yet Dante's instincts told him that the answers were closer than anyone realized, hidden in plain sight among the tangled relationships and hidden motives of those he knew best. As a detective, Dante had always prided himself on his ability to separate fact from emotion, to follow the evidence no matter where it led. But this case was different. Drew wasn't just another victim. He was family, a brother in all but blood, connected through the intricate ties of the Courtemane and Corinthos clans. The personal stakes made every lead feel heavier, every dead end more frustrating. Dante's nights were sleepless, his days consumed by the relentless pursuit of justice. He pored over witness statements, security footage, and forensic reports, but the answers remained elusive. The shooter had been careful, leaving behind no fingerprints, no clear motive, at least, not one that Dante could discern at first. The first break in the case came unexpectedly, as so many breakthroughs do. A grainy piece of security footage from a nearby warehouse surfaced, showing a figure in a dark jacket fleeing the scene moments after the shooting. The image was far from clear, but something about the figure's gait, the way they moved with a quiet confidence, struck Dante as familiar. He couldn't place it at first, but the nagging sense of recognition gnawed at him. He watched the footage over and over, frame by frame, until his eyes burned and his mind raced with possibilities. Whoever this was, they knew how to cover their tracks, but they weren't invisible. Not yet. Dante's investigation soon led him to question those closest to Drew, a task that felt like navigating a minefield. The Courtemane family was a labyrinth of loyalties and grudges, and the Corinthos clan was no less complicated. Michael, Drew's nephew and a pillar of the Corinthos empire, was among the first to offer his support, vowing to do whatever it took to find the culprit. His sincerity seemed genuine, his grief palpable. Michael had always been the golden son, the one who carried the weight of his family's legacy with a quiet determination. But as Dante dug deeper, he began to notice cracks in Michael's polished exterior. Moments of hesitation, fleeting glances that betrayed unease. The turning point came when Dante received an anonymous tip, a cryptic message delivered to the police station in an unmarked envelope. Inside was a single photograph, blurry but unmistakable. It showed Michael standing in an alley near the site of the shooting, holding what appeared to be a gun. The timestamp on the photo placed it mere hours before Drew was attacked. Dante's heart sank as he stared at the image, his mind racing to reconcile the man he knew with the damning evidence before him. Michael, the brother he had stood by through countless storms, the man who had fought for his family time and again. Could he really be capable of such a betrayal? Determined to uncover the truth, Dante kept the photograph a secret, sharing it only with his most trusted colleague, Detective Harrison Chase. Together, they began to retrace Michael's movements in the days leading up to the shooting. They discovered inconsistencies in his alibi, gaps in his story that he couldn't explain away. Michael claimed he had been at a business meeting across town when Drew was shot, but the security footage from the alleged location showed no sign of him. Phone records revealed calls to burner phones, numbers that led to dead ends but hinted at a deeper conspiracy. Each piece of evidence was a thread, and Dante was determined to follow them all until the truth unraveled. As the investigation intensified, Dante couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Late-night calls with no one on the other end, shadowy figures lingering just out of sight. Someone was trying to send him a message. He began to suspect that Michael wasn't acting alone, that the shooting was part of a larger scheme orchestrated by forces he couldn't yet identify. The Corinthos family had no shortage of enemies, and Drew's return to Port Charles had stirred old rivalries and unearthed buried secrets. Was Michael a pawn in someone else's game? Or was he the mastermind pulling the strings? Dante's next move was a risky one. He decided to confront Michael directly, but not as a detective, as a brother. He invited Michael to meet him at the pier, a place where they had shared countless conversations over the years. The night was cold, the air heavy with the scent of the harbor. Michael arrived, his expression guarded but not hostile. Dante wasted no time, pulling the photograph from his jacket and placing it in Michael's hands. "Explain this," he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. Michael's reaction was telling. His face paled, his hands trembled slightly as he studied the image. For a moment Dante thought he saw a flicker of guilt, but Michael quickly composed himself. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, his voice firm but strained. He claimed the photo was a setup, that someone was trying to frame him for reasons he didn't understand. He insisted he would never hurt Drew, that their bond as family was unbreakable. But his words rang hollow to Dante, who had seen too many lies unravel in the face of evidence. The confrontation left Dante more conflicted than ever. Part of him wanted to believe Michael, to cling to the trust they had built over years of shared struggles. But the detective in him couldn't ignore the facts. The photograph, the missing alibi, the burner phones, they all pointed to Michael. And yet something didn't add up. If Michael was guilty, why was he so calm? Why hadn't he fled or tried to cover his tracks more thoroughly? The pieces were there, but the puzzle still didn't fit. Determined to find the final piece, Dante turned to forensic evidence. He sent the gun in the photograph to the lab for analysis, hoping for a breakthrough. The results were staggering. The gun matched the caliber of the weapon used in Drew's shooting, and traces of gunshot residue were found on a jacket recovered from Michael's apartment. The evidence was overwhelming, but Dante couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. He began to wonder if Michael was protecting someone else, someone with enough power to manipulate the evidence and point the finger at him. As Dante delved deeper, he uncovered a web of deceit that extended far beyond Michael. Business dealings gone wrong, old grudges resurfacing, and a shadowy figure pulling the strings from behind the scenes. All of it pointed to a conspiracy that threatened to engulf Port Charles. Dante realized that the truth about Drew's shooting wasn't just about Michael. It was about power, control, and the lengths to which people would go to protect their secrets. In the days that followed, Dante's investigation took him to the heart of the Corinthos organization. He uncovered documents that suggested Michael had been under pressure from outside forces, possibly coerced into actions he didn't fully understand. But the evidence against him was airtight, and Dante knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. With a heavy heart, he prepared to bring Michael in for questioning, knowing that the fallout would ripple through their family and the entire town. As Dante stood on the precipice of a truth that could destroy everything he held dear, he couldn't help but wonder if justice was worth the cost. Michael's fate hung in the balance, and with it, the fragile bonds that held Port Charles together. The evidence was clear, but the truth was anything but. In a town where loyalty was both a shield and a weapon, Dante's pursuit of justice would test the limits of his resolve, and the strength of the family he had fought so hard to protect. The story of Dante's discovery was far from over. Each revelation brought new questions, each answer a new layer of complexity. As he prepared to confront Michael with the full weight of the evidence, Dante knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger, betrayal, and the kind of truth that could change Port Charles forever. The evidence pointed to Michael, but in a world where nothing was ever as it seemed, Dante couldn't shake the feeling that the real shooter was still out there, watching, waiting, and ready to strike again. Dante Falconeri had spent weeks chasing leads that seemed to go nowhere, the shooting of Drew Kane remaining one of the darkest mysteries lingering in Port Charles. While many suspected outside enemies, mob rivals, or even lingering Cassadine vendettas, the case stubbornly refused to make sense. Every time Dante believed he was closing in on an answer, another twist sent him back to square one. Yet Dante, a cop known for persistence, couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was much closer to home than anyone dared admit. He replayed conversations in his mind, noticed contradictions in alibis, and slowly pieced together fragments of evidence that painted a disturbing picture. The unthinkable began to surface. Michael Corinthos, the golden son of Port Charles, might be the one responsible for Drew's brush with death. The possibility was so staggering that Dante at first tried to convince himself he was wrong. Michael had built his life around loyalty to family, trying to escape the violent cycle that Sonny Corinthos lived in every day. He was a husband, a father, a businessman, someone who wanted a cleaner path than mob wars and vendettas. For Dante to believe Michael could actually pull the trigger on someone like Drew felt almost impossible. But the evidence wouldn't let go. A stray surveillance photo surfaced showing Michael in the area the night Drew was ambushed. Then came phone records, oddly timed calls that suggested Michael had been tracking Drew's movements. None of it was solid proof on its own, but when Dante lined up the details, they began to form a pattern too sharp to ignore. The motive was murky at first, until Dante remembered Michael's fraught history with Drew. Though the two men had often been allies, especially when it came to protecting family, their relationship had cracks beneath the surface. Drew knew secrets, dangerous ones, about Sonny's empire, about ELQ, even about certain past cover-ups that Michael had orchestrated to keep his family safe. More than once, Drew had clashed with Michael over choices involving business and loyalty. Dante wondered if Michael's sense of control, his fear of losing power or being exposed, had finally driven him to act in a way no one expected. In the soap world, love and loyalty often twisted into betrayal, and maybe Michael had crossed that line. As Dante quietly pursued the lead, he knew exposing Michael would rip Port Charles apart. Sonny's world was already crumbling. His family divided, his enemies circling, his own judgment questioned. To reveal that Michael, Sonny's own son, had shot Drew could destroy what little remained of Sonny's fragile ties to his children. Dante wrestled with a painful conflict of his own. He was both a detective and a brother. How could he take down Michael without shattering his family? But the oath he swore as a cop weighed heavily. Truth had to come before personal loyalty, no matter how much it hurt. Dante knew if he ignored the evidence, someone else would eventually find it, and the fallout could be even worse. The tension began to escalate as Dante's investigation closed in. He followed a trail of financial anomalies, small transactions linked to a burner phone Michael had used. That phone placed Michael disturbingly close to the docks when Drew was shot. He even uncovered security footage from a nearby warehouse, grainy but telling, showing a man of Michael's build fleeing the scene. Though the image wasn't crystal clear, Dante's gut told him it was enough to move forward. Each discovery left Dante torn between anger and sorrow. Michael had always been the one Corinthos child who seemed destined for something better, someone who might finally escape the chaos Sonny brought into their lives. And yet, here Dante was, staring at evidence that suggested Michael had become every bit as ruthless and calculating as the father he tried to rise above. When Dante confronted Michael subtly, dropping questions in casual conversation, Michael grew defensive in ways that raised even more alarms. He dismissed Dante's curiosity too quickly, his answers rehearsed, his gaze avoiding Dante's steady eyes. To Dante it was confirmation of guilt. Michael was hiding something. Still Dante hesitated. One wrong move could alert Michael and drive him deeper into denial, or even push him to cover his tracks in more dangerous ways. The cop in Dante wanted to push forward, arrest him, and let the legal system decide. But the brother in Dante hesitated, knowing the fallout would send shockwaves through their entire family. At the same time, Drew's recovery added another layer of urgency. Though Drew was still weak, he had begun to piece together flashes of memory from the night of the shooting. His recollections were fragmented. Shadows, voices, footsteps, but something about Michael's presence that night kept surfacing in his mind. If Drew's memory came back fully, Dante's investigation wouldn't be needed. The stale, recycled air of the PCPD interrogation room was a familiar scent to Detective Dante Falconeri. It was a cocktail of sweat, cheap coffee, and despair, a smell that had seeped into the very walls and his own clothing over the years. But tonight it felt different. Tonight, the air was thick with a tension that was entirely personal, A slow-burning fuse that had been lit months ago with a single gunshot that shattered his family. He stared at the two-way mirror, his own reflection a ghostly superimposition over the empty chair on the other side. Soon that chair would be occupied. Soon, he would have to look into the eyes of the man he was now certain had tried to murder his brother. Not by blood but by a bond forged in the unique crucible of their lives. Michael Corinthos. His cousin. His brother in all but name. The man who had stood by him through prison, through loss, through every conceivable hell Port Charles could conjure. And the man Dante was now preparing to break. The case of Drew Cain's shooting had been a thorn in his side, a persistent, nagging failure that had cost him sleep and peace of mind. Drew was a good man, a former SEAL who had stumbled into their chaotic world and become an integral part of it, especially to his mother, Sam, and to his little brother, Scout. The attack had been brazen, executed with a chilling professionalism that suggested a hired killer. There were no witnesses, no murder weapon recovered, and only the most fragmentary of forensic evidence, a few distorted tire tread marks, a single unidentifiable synthetic fiber caught on a splintered fence post near the scene. For months the investigation had languished, a cold case file that haunted Dante's desk. He had pursued every lead, from old enemies of Drew's from his intelligence days to the ever-present threats swirling around his father, Sonny Corinthos. Each path had led to a dead end, a frustrating confirmation of nothing. The prevailing theory within the department was a professional hit, someone who had come in, done the job, and vanished without a trace. But Dante had always felt a dissonance, a quiet, unsettling hum in the back of his mind that the answer was closer to home. The shooter had known Drew's patterns, his route home from the hospital after visiting Scout. They had chosen a spot with no security cameras, a blind spot in the city's digital eye. It was personal, not professional. A hitman would have taken the shot and been done. This shooter had lingered, ensuring the job was complete, firing a second point-blank round into Drew's chest as he lay bleeding on the asphalt. That was rage. That was vengeance. His thoughts, as they so often did, drifted to Michael. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, Michael had been a pillar of strength. He had been at the hospital around the clock, supporting Carly, Jocelyn, and Sam. He had been the one to coordinate security for the family, the one whose voice remained steady when everyone else's was cracking with grief and fear. He had sat with Dante for hours going over everything he knew, which was nothing. He had been the perfect, concerned family member. But cracks had begun to appear. Small, almost imperceptible fissures in the facade. A hesitation when Drew's name was mentioned. A too quickly averted gaze when the topic of the investigation came up. A certain hardened set to his jaw that Dante had initially mistaken for shared frustration. He remembered a conversation at Kelly's weeks after the shooting. Michael had been staring into his coffee, his knuckles white around the ceramic mug. "We're never going to find who did this, are we?" Michael had said, his voice low and flat. "We will," Dante had insisted, the conviction in his voice feeling hollow even to his own ears. "These guys always slip up." Michael had looked up then, and his eyes held a strange, bleak certainty. Not this one. This one was smart. He knew exactly what he was doing. "He's probably long gone." At the time, Dante had taken it as pessimism born from helplessness. Now he saw it for what it was, a hope. A hope that the truth would remain buried. The break, when it came, was not from a high-tech lab or a confidential informant. It came from the most mundane of places. A traffic stop. 2 nights ago, a patrol car had pulled over a beat-up sedan for a broken taillight. The driver, a low-level enforcer for a minor league drug operation, had been nervous, sweating profusely. When the officer had run his name, he'd found an outstanding warrant for a parole violation. A search of the vehicle incident to arrest had yielded nothing of interest in the passenger compartment, but the trunk told a different story. Buried under a moldy spare tire and a collection of rusty tools was a sealed, waterproof case. Inside, wrapped in an oil-stained rag, was a 9mm handgun. The gun was processed and its ballistics run through the national database as a matter of routine. It was a long shot, a 1 in a million chance. But Port Charles, it seemed, was a town that thrived on long shots. The bullet that had been recovered from Drew Cain's body, the one that had miraculously been stopped by his ribcage, saving his life, was a match. A perfect, unequivocal match. The gun used to shoot Drew Kane had been found. Dante had been in his lieutenant's office when the report landed. The feeling was not one of triumph, but of a cold, heavy stone settling in his gut. This was it. The key. He had taken possession of the weapon himself, handling it with the reverence of a holy relic and the dread of a poison chalice. The gun was clean, wiped free of prints. But the man in custody, one Leo Spinelli, was not a hardened professional. He was a coward. And under the relentless pressure of a potential murder charge, he had cracked in under an hour. His story was simple, and it had turned Dante's blood to ice. Spinelli claimed he'd been hired as a middleman, a cleaner. His job was not to use the gun, but to dispose of it. Permanently. He was to take it out on a fishing boat and drop it into the deepest part of the Sound. He'd been paid $5,000 in cash, handed to him in a plain manila envelope in a deserted parking garage. When asked who hired him, Spinelli had shrugged, his face pale with fear. I don't know a name. It was all done through a burner phone. Texts only. The guy was a ghost. It was a dead end. Another one. Dante had felt the familiar surge of frustration. They had the murder weapon, but it led nowhere. He had spent the next 24 hours chasing the phantom phone. A fruitless endeavor that had only confirmed its untraceable nature. He was back where he started, only with more evidence and no one to charge. It was a passing comment from Spinelli, almost an afterthought as he was being led back to his cell, that changed everything. Dante, dejected, had been packing up the evidence box containing the gun. Weird thing though, Spinelli had muttered, more to himself than to Dante. The guy who paid me. He was wearing a fancy watch. Real fancy. Like shiny. Looked out of place. Dante had frozen, his hand hovering over the box. What kind of watch? I don't know, man. A rich guy's watch. Silver with a blue face. Had these little diamonds or something around the edge. I remember 'cause the light from the street lamp caught it when he handed me the envelope.